Another day, another Manchester City Premier League legal dispute unfurls. Not for the first time, certainly not for the last time in all likelihood, as Manchester City once again go back to court, or at least start the proceedings of which, with the Premier League in response to the associated party transaction debacle that has plagued the Premier League, plagued the biggest team in the city, in the league rather, at least in terms of success over recent years. And once again, Aston Villa chiming in, the chairman Nazwari very much ahead of the curve, predicting this would happen. We've got all of that to go through. We've also got a little bit of insight into, at least my take as to what's happening, why it's happening, and how it's probably going to end. Let me first and foremost ask you guys, if you do enjoy this kind of football finance content, you can find it right here on Sean Butler TV and on Football Inc. And if it does involve Tottenham Hotspur specifically, then you might also find it on Spurs Talk Show if that's your jive and your jam. Guys, let's find out exactly what is going on by starting with today's story. Let me just first and foremost pivot to my correct alignment here. And we're going to start with here we go. From GB News, forgive the crude journalistic publication that I picked, but it was one that didn't have an ad blocker or a content wall on it. So Manchester City and Premier League are locked in a legal dispute. Manchester City have launched a fresh legal challenge against the Premier League over its associated party transaction APT rules, marking the latest development in an ongoing dispute between the league and its champions. The club initiated new arbitration proceedings on January the 20th, 2025, contesting amendments to sponsorship regulations that were approved by Premier League clubs in November, only 60 days ago, of 2024. City are seeking a declaration that the current APT rules, which govern commercial deals between clubs and companies linked to their owners, are unlawful and therefore void. The challenges will be held by Lord Panic, KC. Nobody panic! I think the Premier League, the coffers might be panicking a little bit when they realise how much money they're probably having to spend in all of these different legal disputes. Don't forget that they got caught up in their own appellate court or in the Court of Appeal by Leicester City for an alleged PSR infraction that the Leicester City club and lawyers use their own laws against them. The Premier League, as I always say, are inept at creating laws that are intended to create a fairer and more balanced playing field. Every time they do so, the loopholes that are then created are incredibly easy to find. In fact, we're going to go through it at some point. I'm going to bring back a little video, a little clip from a video that was from June, I think it was, or maybe even May of last year, where Johnny H and myself were talking about potential loopholes that even donuts like the two of us could figure out. We had a list of 10. We just spoke about one of them briefly. And within 24 hours, we saw all of the 5 clubs, the dissidents, we like to call them, the teams that seem to be going against the grain of the other 15 teams, the minority that only need one more club to pivot away from the majority in future Premier League rulemaking votes and voting decisions at their various annual AGMs, to be able to then curtail any real meaningful change with regards FFP, PSR, the anchoring rule, and everything else that is still up in the air, still unclear as to what exactly the direction of travel is with regards that. Of course, we found out yesterday that the PFA are also trying to sue and trying to create some litigation, saying that there is legal challenges with regards to the anchoring rule. Again, probably being helped and maybe funded by, let's be honest, who you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. Some of those teams that don't want to see any stricter regulations to come in to curtail their effective ambitions with regards to spend on revenue. Let's continue with the story. Lord Panic, who is also representing the club in their defence against 115 charges of alleged breaches of Premier League financial rules. The case represents a further escalation in the increasingly tense relationship between the Premier League and its reigning champion. City's challenge centres on the testament of shareholder loans under the revised regulations, which they claim remains discriminatory and unfair. The club argues that while commercial deals must undergo fair market value assessments, think back to 2023 when Manchester City tried to get the approval of a sponsorship deal with their the overarching owner's sister club. I think it's Etihad Airways, I think it was at the time specifically. And it was rejected because the Premier League lawmakers had decided that it was at unreasonably high valuations, and so it was rejected. And they say that whilst, as it says here, that the commercial deals must undergo fair market value assessments, existing shareholder loans have been set to one side and escape retrospective fees worth millions. Now, obviously, Arsenal, the Cronkies, are a team that have benefited from those loans very recently. In fact, I think this story goes on to mention it. So let me, rather than just chiming in, let's see how the story finishes off. Some of City's rivals, here you go, including Arsenal and Liverpool, have benefited significantly from such lending arrangements. The champions specifically contest that clubs can continue to benefit from shareholder loans with only the interest rate subject to fair market assessment. They further object that clubs can obtain the full value of these loans before any such assessment takes place. Well, if we're talking about clubs that have benefited from full market value as a consequence of indiscretions at things that are unfair, I think you could easily point the finger at one of the clubs that seems to vote against any of these rules alongside Manchester City in Chelsea. Roman Abramovich coming in long before the rules were broken. The rules were made regarding FFP and any kind of PSR or sustainability to level the playing field, spent an absolute fortune, created a monster amount of success off the back of that indirectly and in fact very directly improves the brand of the club, which therefore adds to the draw. As I said, 75% of all trophies, I believe, give or take, that have been won in the last 12 or 13 years have been won by both City and Chelsea. And of course, all of that historical success for Chelsea began with the Roman Abramovich era. Traditionally, there were trophies in the past. If you go back for the last 75 years, as there has been demonstrated on the Spurs Talk Show. If you are interested in an appraisal of how trophies are won, who wins them, and the shape and trend in that direction, you can find that video on the Spurs Talk Show. I'll try and throw up a link at the top here. But Chelsea very much have benefited from a system that didn't have the rules in place at the time. Even whilst that was going on, Chelsea were alleged and actually found guilty of and actually paid the fines for certain infractions with regards the distribution of revenue and funds and payments towards Roman Abramovich's PA, whose name, lady, escapes me right now. And still to this day, Chelsea, let's be honest, entirely honest, Chelsea only have the benefit of $1 billion and more spent from Todd Boehly, in no small part because of Roman Abramovich's fortuitous or otherwise exit from the club under the pressure and the stresses from the UK government because of what was happening with Russia and Ukraine at the time. And had that not happened, then Todd Boehly wouldn't be able to come in and do the things that he's done. No other club could inherit the same set of circumstances in all likelihood. It won't happen again. And yet Chelsea, as we see right now, are rightly at where they should be at the top end of the table, having spent the sort of money that they have. So if Manchester City is going to make rules and make statements regarding loans being unreasonable, and by the way, I do agree with them that what's good for the goose is not good for the gander, but you can't have it both ways. You can't have your cake and eat it and make a statement whereby one set of unnecessary and unfair regulations benefits some when it could also benefit them if they chose to go down that path, but another set of unfair regulations and unfair laws that have no teeth and too many loopholes can suit another. To me, the whole thing needs to be rethought and reworked. This anchoring rule, for what it's worth, I personally believe that it will still have massive loopholes in it and massive fundamental issues, but listen, let's be entirely honest, it's probably a step in the right direction, but Manchester City and the PFA are all these different organizations that we don't really know who is pulling the strings and who is going to benefit from what sort of outcomes regarding those decisions with legal pressures is really directing that travel. But in any event, what we do see right now is two factions within the Premier League. We see 15 teams that seem to be in approval, generally speaking, with regards making the level playing field a little bit leveler and understanding that there's still loopholes that need to be figured out, ironed out. And then you have 4 or 5 teams that seem to be moving in the other direction. Newcastle, understandably, wanting to have less restrictions on their obscene wealth with the ambitions that they have. But will they fund and spend £1 billion, 1.2, 1.5 billion, as is proposed to be on a new stadium? If they are going to do that, which it looks like they probably are, to move to a 75,000-seater stadium next door to St. James's Park, who's going to fund it? There are, as we spoke about yesterday, there are rumours that the Saudi PIF fund isn't going to put in the cash directly. And so are they going to have to get funding from that? What will that debt structuring look like? All those things to come. Aston Villa, as I say, interestingly moving towards the side of those teams that are looking for less restrictions and for more obscurity and more ability to kind of move between the very obvious loopholes and very obvious goalposts as they shape that story. To me, I find it curious. I did find it curious why it was, in fact, that Aston Villa, who of course is owned in part by the Africa's and Egypt's wealthiest man, why they would want to take the side of the teams that they are competing with at the top end, when ideally you would probably think that they're a team that is, given that they have 98%, 96%, currently 96% wages to revenue as a percentage of spend. And you would think hiccups and problems coming down the road if they continue to participate in Europe, which at the moment it looks like they will, until of course you find out that John Duran can move to the Saudi Arabian League for a 68 million pound fee or something like that, that came out of nowhere and makes you kind of go, a little bit. Is this one of the things that I've been sort of suggesting for a long time, that there's other ways to find those loopholes, as we discussed in those videos that I'll show you very, very shortly in June of last year. Let's just finish this article. The dispute follows City's partial victory in a previous arbitration where a panel found elements of the original APT rules to be unlawful. The amendments to the APT rules were passed in a Premier League vote last November, with 16 clubs supporting the changes. Only 4 clubs opposed the modifications: Manchester City, Aston Villa, Newcastle United, and Nottingham Forest. Prior to the vote, Villa had warned other clubs about the likelihood of legal action from Manchester City. In a letter to clubs, Villa stated it was abundantly clear that any vote, if passed, will result in immediate further litigation by Manchester City. The vote followed City's initial legal challenge in June of last year, when the Premier League rejected a new sponsorship agreement with Abu Dhabi-based airline Etihad. The Premier League had ruled this deal was not of fair market value, triggering the first round of legal proceedings. Premier League Chief Executive Richard Masters has informed clubs of City's new challenge through a letter sent on Thursday. It does beg the question, is part of Manchester City's profile and portfolio of options with regards, how do you figure out a method to continue to take advantage of lapses in the laws that currently exist, whilst you're at the same time trying to build a cabal, build a almost like a collusionary appetite with certain teams that can put the brakes on any further stricter and tightening of the laws? Is one of those methods to know that their pockets are incredibly deep and far deeper than those of the lawyers of the Premier League panel. And so, to Aston Villa chairman's the Aston Villa chairman's point here, he says it was obvious that there was going to be an abundantly clear that any vote, if passed, will result in immediate further litigation. In fact, on a different article, it goes further to say that what he is recommending is that we park the rule changes that we agreed with regards anchoring, we park the rule changes with regards some of the other areas, and that we go back to the negotiating table and find amendments to try to make it a little bit looser, a little bit more appealing to those teams with huge ambition and very, very deep pockets. Obviously, the other teams have said no. They have another vote coming up, I think, in a couple of weeks' time to decide whether to approve the previous rules as they currently stand, knowing full well that in all likelihood, Manchester City and maybe others in that group of dissident teams will likely continue to throw money at the legal issue. And of course, tying up the lawyers in one set of litigation obviously slows down their ability to finish up others. And maybe, like I say, it's just another useful tool for very wealthy and very clever people who really want to slow down the march towards a level playing field. You know how I feel about it if you watch this channel. I'm not picking sides because I'm a Tottenham fan. If anything, you could make the argument that Daniel Levy and Tottenham's owner Joe Lewis and Enoch could, if they had the ambition, start to take advantage of the obvious loopholes that do exist. I do think that the APT rules, whilst logical in principle, don't go far enough, because obviously the Etihad and Manchester City have a very direct relationship, but you don't have to be a genius to work out that there can be a lot of back scratching that can take place between teams who have owners whose fingers distribute into a hell of a lot of different pies. You don't have to have a sponsorship from the Etihad directly to make Manchester City's coffers a little bit more fuller. Of course, you have the same question of how do you really assert value? How do you, when it comes to a player, how can you possibly sit there and say that a player is only worth X? Because value is in the eye of the beholder, as is love. To one team, a player that is desperate for that type of person is going to be valued a lot higher than to a team who has an abundance of depth in a certain specific position. So value is subjective. And also, if you don't have the APT direct relationship to worry about, it's very easy for the PIF fund, for example, or for what it's worth, a Daniel Levy, ENIC, who have and of course Tavistock Group, their overarching owners. It's very easy to be able to say to companies that are partners or customers of, vendors of, for example, of third-party, alternative party businesses within the group umbrella, to make a payment now in favor of something later if that particular company was to go and sponsor the football team. It doesn't have to be a direct transaction. Indirect, you can jump around the houses with, we'll pay you now, we'll pay you later, etc., as long as some of the money comes back into the team. And if there is no direct relationship between the football club and the actual sponsoring party, even if that sponsoring party has a relationship indirectly with another area of the Tavistock Group or the Manchester City owners group, the Abu Dhabi family, then how can you possibly kind of curtail all of those loopholes? Speaking of other loopholes, for what it's worth, guys, I do just want to show you, this is obviously the one that kind of captured my imagination back last year, as we saw Chelsea, Newcastle, Aston Villa, and a few other teams all utilized player trading between each other, between young players within their teams that were kind of surplus to requirements, maybe with some bright futures, but that the valuations of those players were far higher than market value would determine and would dictate. Yet in so doing, as they were brought through the youth system, their amortization value was placed on the books immediately, versus anything that you purchased could be distributed off over the course of the contract. And that was a tactic that Johnny and I spoke about before we knew anything about this. And I just want to pivot for a very brief second to this particular video to show you what we were talking about there.
How about this for an example, right? Two teams trading a player for each other. But a huge.
This is Wednesday, the 19th of June.
That I could see playing out. Let's just Club A and Club B have some sort of relationship. They're friends with each other, or they're both in trouble from an FFP perspective. One player is wanted by Club A, has a player that's wanted by Club B. Club B has a player that's wanted by Club A. Both players are valued at £10 million. Both players cost the clubs £5 million. Rather than selling them to each other at £10 million, why not sell them to each other at £50 million? Right? You get to amortize the contract. It's a net, doesn't make any difference. You pay them 50 for your player, you get 50 for their player, and you get to amortize the 50 over the 5 years, but you get 50 million quid on the reception onto your book straight away. Net, it makes no difference. But in terms of amortization and then the circumvention of FFP, I don't know if that's happened yet, but it certainly could happen. And it's certainly something that might happen between a team like Newcastle and a team like Chelsea, who ultimately have the same PIF fund owner, who what's good for the goose is good for the gander.
A few hours later.
So a couple of hours later, I think that was the next day, Aston Villa are advancing in talks to sign Lewis Dobbin from Everton as expected. Meanwhile, Everton have signed, whatever it says there, 3 Premier League clubs spending big money on each other's untested youth players before season accounting deadline, yada, yada, yada. So we literally ended up seeing the exact theory, the exact hypothesis of just one particular example coming to fruition in that same 24-hour period. And I think that those things are very easy to spot. Like I say, if someone like Johnny and myself can come up with those sorts of ideas and we're just numbnuts and donuts, then the smartest guys in the room, if they're not thinking about ways to stay within the rules, then they are thinking about ways to circumvent them. And to me, the worrying thing here is I do think that Manchester City, that whilst they had a small victory back in November, and I think they'll probably get a victory here as well. And to be entirely honest, we haven't got the results of the 115 charges yet, but apparently, as far as I'm led to believe, that those arbitrations, those court hearings have already somewhat taken place. And I think that the decision is due in around spring. But the fact that they've gone and spent as much money as they have in January, the fact that they've seemingly spent more money than all of the other teams in the Premier League put together in January suggests to me either that they are getting ahead of a piece of bad news with regards to that, and hopefully they're going to bring in these youth talents now, so that if there is any kind of proxied relegation, even though relegation itself is not an outcome that can happen, that they're set for the future. Or for me, it comes across far more likely that their lawyers are incredibly smart, the smartest men in the room, and they have found loopholes. Let's be honest, like entirely honest, as I said here, there are more loopholes. There's more holes in the Premier League lawmaking body of work that is supposed to curtail sustainability threats and also curtail any kind of perceived imbalance through obscene wealth from companies that are essentially state-backed. Then there's more holes in the rules than in my kitchen sieve, and to me it's problematic. And I'm not just saying that as a Tottenham fan. I'm saying that as someone who is desperate to see competitive balance, desperate to see a league whereby more teams have realistic opportunities of consistent, sustainable success. For me, I think that the fact that 5 teams have won 92% of all trophies in the last 25 years is boring. I think it's problematic. I'm sure if you're watching this and you're a fan of one of those teams, you don't care. If you are a fan of Manchester City and Chelsea and your teams have won, I think 75% of all trophies in the last 12 years, I think it is, then that is boring. And to me, I want to see a leveling of the playing field, an opportunity whereby everybody can compete. They can compete technically on the valuations of the owners' net wealth. I think is it 29 owners in the Premier League in the English league that are billionaires? I believe it's 29, or maybe it's 19. I'm not entirely sure. But in terms of obscene wealth, obviously the PIF fund take the biscuit. And as I said, guys, for me, with Aston Villa seemingly joining that party, the John Duran story, that surely should make some of you sort of wake up and go, what's going to happen there? As I said in yesterday's video, if John Duran is not back in a top 5 league within the next 2 years, I will be absolutely astonished. I just don't see there to be any other real purpose other than the player getting a huge payoff right now. But he will come back, like most of them do, unless they are at the end of their career. But he'll come back, and teams like Newcastle, Aston Villa, and Chelsea, who all seem to be scratching each other's backs, both in the player trading and in the ability to help each other with regards to these rules. I think there'll be more of the same, and I'm terrified that one more team will join that party, and therefore from then on, it seems like any more tightening or stricter rules with regards competitive and sustainability issues will be a dead rubber. Let me leave it there, guys. Let me know your thoughts. FFP, PSR, anchoring. Let me know if you're interested in the topic, whether or not you think that Manchester City will win this new legal challenge. Is it just a way to tie up the resources of the Premier League lawmakers so that they can't focus on one if they have to focus on the other? At the end of the day, the deepest pockets usually wins, and the smartest minds in the room are certainly on the defence of Manchester City and Aston Villa and those teams that are looking for ways to continue to take advantage of already ridiculously loose and lax in judgment decision-making around how to set a law and how to set an even playing field. Let me know, guys. Like, subscribe, and comment to this channel, Sean Butler TV, to Football Link, if you'll get similar stuff, but we'll be with my co-host Johnny. And if you are a Tottenham fan, or if you're just interested in Tottenham-related content, then Spurs Talk Show. Links in the description. Ciao.